What happens when a simple flight takes an unexpected turn and a young boy is removed from his seat without reason? Malik Thorne was about to learn that sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't mean shouting, it means quietly demanding respect. But when the world sees him as less than, who will listen? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The airport buzzed like a restless beehive. Morning light filtered in through the tall windows at Midlands International Airport, brushing soft gold against cold tiles and shiny suitcase wheels. People moved quickly, voices overlapping with rolling suitcases and the sharp, clipped tones of flight announcements overhead. Malik Thorne walked with careful steps, holding a printed boarding pass in one hand and gripping the strap of his gray backpack with the other. He wore a crisp, white button-up shirt, dark jeans, and sneakers that still looked new. His mother had packed everything the night before, double-checked his ID, and printed the boarding pass herself. He looked up at the sign, Terminal C, Gate 28. He was in the right place. Malik wasn't tall for 10, but he stood straight like his mom always reminded him. "When you walk in anywhere," she said that morning, straightening his collar, "you walk like you belong there. Because you do." He hadn't said much, just nodded, the way he always did when she got serious. At the gate, a woman in a navy blue blazer scanned his pass. "Flying by yourself today?" she asked, almost surprised. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'm going to Atlanta to visit my grandparents." She smiled, handed him his pass back. "All right then, board when your group is called." When they announced first class, Malik stepped forward quietly and joined the line. He didn't notice the looks, not at first. He stepped into the cabin and glanced around, remembering the seat number, 3A. He moved slowly, politely, weaving through the narrow aisle of plush leather seats and people already sipping orange juice. The space felt quieter than the rest of the plane, more serious somehow, grown up. Then she appeared. Gwen Barrage had been watching from the moment he boarded. She had worked with Solar Air for 17 years, knew every detail of every protocol. Something about this child walking into first class alone, young, black, unaccompanied, immediately set off alarms in her mind. She walked toward him, hands clasped in front of her waist, her voice calm but clipped. "Sweetheart, I think you're in the wrong cabin," she said. Malik looked up. "No, ma'am, this is my seat, 3A. He handed her his boarding pass. Gwen barely glanced at it. "This doesn't look right," she said. "Where are your parents?" "My mom booked the ticket," Malik replied, his voice polite but steady. "She couldn't fly today." Gwen's expression didn't change, but her body stiffened. She turned to a younger attendant. "Page security," she said quietly. "Possible ticket issue, passenger unaccompanied." The young attendant hesitated. "But his pass says first class." Gwen didn't blink. "He's 10 years old. This cabin isn't for unsupervised minors. There's probably been a mistake." Malik felt his cheeks flush. He wasn't sure if it was anger or confusion. He wasn't loud. He didn't argue. He just stood there holding his pass, gripping it a little tighter now. The passengers near him had gone quiet. One man in a suit glanced over, then looked away. A woman shook her head slightly, more annoyed at the delay than anything else. When the two uniformed airport officers arrived, Malik tried once more. "I have a ticket. I didn't do anything wrong." The taller officer offered a forced smile. "We're just going to step off for a moment, buddy. We need to confirm something with the gate." Malik didn't move at first. He looked at Gwen, who was now standing to the side, arms crossed. No sympathy, no softness. Like she had already made up her mind about who he was and what he wasn't. He stepped back down the aisle, head low, holding his pass against his chest like it might disappear if he let it go. He didn't cry, but his eyes burned. As he walked past Gwen, she muttered to the younger attendant, not even lowering her voice. "Every day, someone tries to sneak into first class. Nothing new." That line lingered in the air even after Malik had disappeared down the jet bridge, and no one said a word. The metal chair was cold, and Malik sat stiffly on the edge of it, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to fully rest there. He kept his backpack on his shoulders and the crumpled boarding pass in both hands. His eyes followed the pattern of the floor tiles as if they might spell out an answer he didn't have. A man in an airport security vest stood nearby, glancing over at him every few seconds. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. After a while, the man walked over and crouched slightly to get to Malik's eye level. "You want to call your mom or dad, son?" Malik shook his head. Not because he didn't want to, because he didn't know what to say if he did. The officer lingered a moment longer, then nodded once and stepped away. Malik went back to staring at the floor, the silence inside him louder than anything else. His mom had told him he could do this. "You're smart, respectful, and fully capable. Don't let anyone make you question that." But right now, Malik didn't feel capable. He felt small. Not just because of his size, but because everyone else in that cabin had looked at him like he didn't belong. Even the ones who didn't say anything had said enough by turning away. He didn't know if it was the color of his skin or the way he looked alone. Maybe both. Maybe neither. All he knew was he'd done exactly what his mother told him to do, and he'd still been walked out like he didn't matter. He looked down at the pass again. The corner was bent now, wrinkled from how tight he was holding it. It still said 3A. He knew it did, and yet it felt like it didn't matter anymore. Across the city, high above the street noise and morning traffic, the glass tower that held Solara Air's headquarters gleamed under the sun. Inside on the 33rd floor, Dr. Aloria Thorne sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by department heads and strategic planners. The conversation was about potential new international routes, budget projections, and customer loyalty metrics. Then her assistant stepped quietly into the room, handed her a slim tablet with a notification blinking at the top. "Passenger alert. Midland's international passenger name, Malik Thorne. Flight 621 to Atlanta. Removed from aircraft prior to departure. Reason, seat verification unresolved." Her breath caught in her throat, not loudly, not visibly, but enough that the room around her seemed to pause for a second. She blinked once, then tapped the screen for more. The log confirmed it, removed by security. No mention of a violation, no issue with the ticket, just removed. She set the tablet down slowly. "They removed my son," she said quietly, eyes still on the screen, "from my airline, from a seat I paid for, with a boarding pass I issued." The room fell into an uneasy silence. No one spoke. No one moved. She didn't shout. She didn't slam the table. She simply reached for her phone, dialed a direct line, and waited. When the person picked up, her voice was calm, but the kind of calm that warned of a coming storm. "This is Dr. Thorne. I need to speak to the Director of Operations at Midlands. Now." There was a pause. Then another voice on the line. "Yes, Doctor." "Thorne? I want Flight 621 to Atlanta grounded. Immediately." A sharp inhale from the other end. "Ma'am, boarding is complete. The cabin crew is preparing for takeoff." She didn't raise her tone. "You pulled a child off a flight without confirming your own data. If your airport has room to question a legitimate ticket, then it has room to delay a takeoff for internal review." There was hesitation. Then, "Understood." She ended the call, sat back and folded her hands together. The room around her still hadn't resumed movement. Someone finally asked, "Dr. Thorne, was there a problem with the manifest?" "No," she said, eyes narrowing, "but there's a problem with the way we treat people who don't look like we expect them to." Back at the airport, Malik still sat near the window. The same officer came back and placed a small bottle of water on the seat beside him. Malik nodded but didn't reach for it. Through the glass, he saw his flight, the plane that was supposed to take him to Atlanta, still parked at the gate. The jet bridge had been reconnected. A ground crewman stood near the wheel, radio in hand. He frowned. Something had changed, but he didn't know what. He leaned his forehead against the window, the cool surface grounding him. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He still didn't feel okay, but somewhere, far beyond what he could see, something had shifted, like the first slow stir of wind before a summer storm. And Malik didn't know it yet, but that wind had a name, and she was just getting started. The first-class cabin had settled into a strange quiet, the kind of silence that comes after something unspoken happens. Too fast, too uncomfortable for anyone to name it out loud. Gwen Berridge stood near the service galley, flipping through her tablet as if everything were normal, but her eyes weren't really reading anything. She'd been in this job a long time, long enough to know the look of someone who didn't belong, at least that's what she told herself. But as the minutes passed and the hum of polite conversation tried to restart around her, something in her chest wouldn't settle. A young flight attendant, no more than a year into the job, approached her with hesitance in her step. "Ms. Berridge," she said softly, "are we sure that boy wasn't supposed to be here?" Gwen didn't look up. "I've been doing this 17 years, she replied, voice clipped. "I know when someone's in the wrong cabin." The younger woman shifted her weight, clearly uneasy, but said nothing more. Then the speaker system crackled above them. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience. Flight 621 to Atlanta is experiencing a temporary delay due to routine technical verifications. We'll provide an update shortly." The announcement hit Gwen like a tap to the shoulder from someone she hadn't expected. She blinked, glanced toward the cockpit, then down at her tablet again. That wasn't supposed to happen. There had been no technical issues flagged before takeoff. Nothing routine about it. A few rows up, a man in a blazer muttered loud enough for those around to hear. "This is ridiculous. I paid nearly $1,000 for this seat. First I watched them escort some kid off, and now we're stuck here?" The woman beside him gave a sharp sigh and crossed her arms. Gwen didn't hear their exact words, but she could feel the irritation building in the air. She walked briskly to the front of the cabin and tapped on the door to the cockpit. The co-pilot opened it partway. "Who ordered the delay?" Gwen asked. The co-pilot looked at her, eyes uncertain. "We got a call from ops. Not standard. Came from high-level management." "What kind of high level?" He hesitated. "Came down from executive command." Gwen took a half step back, the answer landing heavier than she expected. She turned and walked to the galley again, trying to piece it together. Her fingers moved instinctively toward her phone. She called her supervisor's line. No answer. She tried a second number. Straight to voicemail. A few moments later, a man in an airport operations jacket stepped into the cabin, scanning until he found her. "Ms. Berridge," he said, voice low. "We need you to report to the terminal management office immediately." Gwen blinked. "Now?" "Yes. You're being asked to step off the flight." Passengers turned their heads. The man didn't explain why, and Gwen didn't offer any clarification. She nodded tightly, gathered her tablet, and followed him off the plane. As she walked back through the jet bridge, she could feel the eyes on her, the confused ones, the judgmental ones. The silence followed her, thick and disorienting. Elsewhere in the terminal, Malik had been moved to a quieter room. It wasn't big, but it had a cushioned bench, a small table with bottled water, and a television turned to a travel channel with the sound off. A young woman with a badge reading Customer Experience Team sat nearby, watching him carefully without making him feel like he was being watched. "You doing okay, Malik?" she asked gently. He nodded, eyes on the window. The plane he was supposed to be on hadn't moved. That seemed strange to him. He didn't ask why. Not yet. Instead, he kept his thoughts close. He thought about what had happened on the plane, about how fast it had all unfolded, about how quiet he'd stayed, and most of all, about the look on that woman's face when she told him to leave. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "I didn't do anything wrong." And still the question kept repeating in his head. Why didn't anyone believe me? In a small office near the gate, Gwen sat across from two people she didn't know well. One was a legal affairs representative from the airline. The other, a senior operations manager. Both had papers in front of them, and neither of them was smiling. "Ms. Berridge," the manager began, "we need to review your actions concerning a passenger this morning, Malik Thorne." Gwen straightened in her seat. "I followed protocol. Minors aren't allowed in first class unattended. I had no verification from the gate crew." The legal rep raised an eyebrow. The child had a valid ticket. His seat was confirmed, booked under his name. The issue wasn't with his paperwork. Gwen felt something in her stomach sink, but she held her tone. "I used my judgment based on what I saw. We're taught to spot inconsistencies." The manager set down his pen. "Do you know who Malik Thorne is?" She shook her head. "No. He's the son of Dr. Eloria Thorne, the CEO of Solara Air, silence. Gwen's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Her hands resting on her knees tensed. I didn't know that, she said finally. We believe you, the manager replied, calm but firm. But that doesn't change what happened. You've been asked to step away from duty pending further review. Gwen nodded slowly. Her hands were still. Her face didn't change. But inside something shifted. Not because of the boy's last name. Not even because she'd been pulled from duty. It was something quieter. The growing sense that maybe, just maybe, she had misjudged more than just a passenger. Maybe she'd misjudged herself. And that was harder to face than any suspension could ever be. The elevator ride to the executive floor was quiet, but Eloria's thoughts were anything but. She stood motionless in the glass capsule, her reflection staring back at her, while the city slid downward behind her. The image of Malik's face, his eyes low, shoulders pulled in tight, had lodged itself into her memory like a thorn. It reminded her of something she had spent decades folding away. When she was 9, she had walked into a public library in Baton Rouge, wearing her best Sunday dress, clutching her school ID. She loved books, and that day she wanted to check out a biography on Mae Jemison. But before she could reach the shelves, a white librarian stopped her, gently but firmly, and said, "Sweetheart, this section is for middle schoolers. Do you belong here?" She remembered the sting of that word. Belong. No one had asked if she needed help or what she was looking for. They saw her skin, her braids, her oversized dress. They didn't see a curious little girl. They saw someone who had crossed a line. Back then, she didn't say anything. She had walked out of that library and sat on the steps outside, staring at the parking lot for nearly an hour. That feeling, that shame, that confusion, had lived inside her for years, and now it was Malik's turn to carry it. She walked into her office and closed the door behind her, shutting out the rest of the world. Her phone was already buzzing with updates. The flight had been brought back to the gate. The passenger manifest was locked. HR was coordinating with the airport director. Everything was in motion, but she didn't sit down right away. Instead, she looked out over the skyline of Charlotte, hands braced on the edge of her desk, and took a breath that went all the way down to the ache in her ribs. This wasn't just about her son. It never had been. Across the airport, Malik had been moved to a quiet lounge. Glass walls, dim lights, a calm voice looping overhead announcing arrivals and departures. There was a tray of snacks no one had touched, a TV on mute playing cartoons he didn't care about, and a young employee sitting nearby who kept glancing at him like she wasn't sure if she should say something. She finally tried. "You can call your mom if you want, honey, or we can get you something different to eat." Malik shook his head. "I don't want to talk to anyone." He paused, then added, "I just want to go back to my seat." That made her freeze for a second. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Something about the way he'd said it, quiet but not meek, hit different. He wasn't throwing a fit. He wasn't begging. He was just tired of being seen as someone who didn't belong. Gwen Berridge sat in a corner office with tinted glass, staring out at the runway. She saw the plane being repositioned, watched the fuel truck roll away. Everything was happening without her. She should have felt indignant, she thought. She had followed procedure. That was her defense. But as the minutes ticked by, that certainty began to fray. She remembered something her father used to say when she was a child. "Don't ever let your guard down. People will take advantage the second you do, especially people who don't look like you." It had sounded like wisdom back then, like protection. But now in this moment, it sounded like a warning built on fear, passed down from a time that should have ended long ago. She didn't want to admit it, but she had acted on instinct. Not protocol, instinct, shaped by years of small ideas that had grown into invisible rules. And now she was seeing the cost. Eloria finally walked into the lounge where Malik waited. She didn't rush in, didn't cry. She just sat beside him on the wide leather chair. He looked at her, eyes steady. "Did you stop the whole plane?" he asked. She nodded once. "I did. Because of me?" "Not just because of you," she said. "Because no one should be treated like that. Ever." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't fight back. I just let them take me off. You didn't do anything wrong. I was scared. I thought if I argued, it'd make it worse. She took his hand in both of hers, firm and warm. You don't have to yell to prove you belong, but you don't let them silence you either. There's a difference. He nodded, but his face was unreadable. She watched him for a few more seconds, then stood and turned to her assistant, who had been waiting by the door. I need a full review, she said. Pull every report on passenger removals in the last 48 hours. I want a list of who made the calls and how the cases were handled. The assistant nodded, already taking notes. And find me 3 people who've worked in crew training design. People who won't just teach rules, but teach how to see others. She looked back at Malik, who was now watching her without saying a word. This stopped being about one child the moment they didn't bother to read his name, and with that, she left the room. But Malik stayed sitting, staring at the tray of untouched snacks and the quiet screen across from him. He didn't feel fixed, but he felt seen, and sometimes that's where change begins. The ride home was quiet. The car moved smoothly through the evening traffic, the hum of tires on asphalt a low, steady sound. Malik sat in the back seat, pressed up near the window, watching streetlights pass. He hadn't said much since they left the airport. Eloria sat beside him, not checking her phone for once, just waiting. She glanced over, her voice low and calm. Are you mad at me? Malik didn't answer right away. His voice, when it came, was soft but steady. I'm not mad, he said. I'm just sad, I guess. They all looked at me like I didn't belong, and now everybody knows who I am and why they let me back in. Not because I proved anything, just because you're my mom. That one landed hard. Eloria closed her eyes for a moment. She'd spent her entire adult life fighting for fairness, for accountability, for systems that didn't bend to power, but now power had bent in her direction, and her son could feel it. She reached out and rested a hand on his shoulder, but didn't say anything more. There wasn't much to say that wouldn't sound like spin. The next morning, the top floor of Solara Air's headquarters filled early. No breakfast spread, no smiles, just suits, tablets, and stiff energy. A line of regional directors, legal advisors, PR leads, and operational heads filed into the conference room, where Eloria stood at the head of the table. She didn't wait for everyone to settle. She dove in. Let's get to it, she said. Some of you believe what I did yesterday was a personal overreach, that I disrupted a flight to protect my own child. Murmurs moved through the room. One of the directors, a sharp man from the New York region, spoke up. With all due respect, Dr. Thorne, we've built our reputation on stability. Making exceptions, even for good reasons, can create dangerous precedents. Eloria nodded. That's fair, which is why I didn't make an exception. I responded to a pattern. She tapped her remote. The lights dimmed slightly and a screen behind her came alive with a simple slide. It listed dates, times, flight numbers, and brief incident summaries. 17, she said, her voice clear. That's how many passengers in the last 60 days were removed from first-class seating for vague reasons related to verification or ticket irregularities. She clicked again. Another slide appeared. Photos, names, demographics. 6 had valid boarding passes. 2 were licensed physicians. 1 was a Vietnam veteran. 4 were children. All were Black, Asian, or Latino. The room went still. Eloria stepped forward slightly. This isn't about Malik. This is about all of them. The ones who weren't the child of a CEO. The ones who didn't have anyone to call the tower and stop a plane. A woman from legal spoke up cautiously. But we haven't received formal complaints. No, Eloria cut in, because people don't always complain when they've already been told they don't belong. They just stop flying with us. They tell their families. They take it as proof. Silence again, not hostile, just heavy. She finished with this. This isn't a people problem, it's a systems problem. And systems only change when someone stops pretending it's just bad luck. Elsewhere in the city, Gwen Barrage sat in a small HR office filling out her statement. Her hands didn't shake, but her pen moved slower than usual. The form asked her to describe her actions. She kept it simple. No excuses. Just what she did and what she thought she saw. After she handed it in, she sat alone for a while, looking out at a parking lot half full. Her phone buzzed. A message from Aaron, a former colleague who had moved to another airline. Heard what happened. You all right? Sounds like they're making an example of you. Gwen stared at the screen for a long minute before replying. No, she typed. Someone actually saw me, and I'm still figuring out how that feels. Back at home, Malik sat at the kitchen table with a pencil in hand. He had a sheet of loose-leaf paper in front of him, then changed his mind and opened the email app on his tablet. He typed slowly. Hi, Mom. I was thinking about today. I know I'm still a kid, but one day I want to be someone who helps other people. Like, if someone else is in my spot, maybe I could help make sure they don't get kicked out. Do you think I could do that when I grow up? Love, Malik. Eloria read it later that night, sitting on the edge of her bed. She read it twice, then a third time. A single tear ran down her cheek, not from pain, not even from pride exactly, but from the quiet realization that her son had already become someone who understood what mattered. He didn't want to win. He wanted the world to be better than it had been for him. And in that moment, Eloria knew this wasn't the end of the storm. It was just the first roll of thunder. Malik stood in front of the bathroom mirror, his reflection staring back with quiet focus. He'd barely spoken a word since breakfast. The house was still. His mother had already left for the press conference, the staff keeping a respectful distance. But Malik didn't need help this morning. He was doing something for himself. He buttoned his shirt, the same one he wore the day they pulled him off the plane. It wasn't spotless anymore. Still had a faint wrinkle on the shoulder and a slightly worn fold near the pocket. But he chose it for a reason. He fixed the collar, tugged at the hem, and looked at himself one last time. I didn't do anything wrong, he whispered. Then louder, like practicing for something. If they need to see me again, I'll make sure they know exactly who they're looking at. The day moved quickly from there. In a large conference hall inside Solar Air's headquarters, reporters filled the rows, some in sharp suits, others in polos with cameras slung across their shoulders. The energy buzzed with anticipation, rumor, and commentary passed between notepads and whispered questions. Eloria walked to the podium alone. No entourage, no marketing team standing behind her. She wore a deep blue blazer, simple earrings, no script in hand. The room felt quiet. I'm not here as a mother today, she began. I'm here as someone who leads this airline. Someone responsible for how we treat people, especially when no one is watching. She paused. This past week, an incident on Flight 621 drew attention. A 10-year-old boy was removed from a first-class seat. That child was my son. But I want to be clear, this isn't about him alone. This is about a system that has, over time, quietly permitted decisions rooted more in perception than fact. Behind her, a screen lit up. Data filled the display. Dates, routes, case summaries. In the last 60 days, we've removed or reseated 17 passengers based on concerns around ticket verification. Every single one of those passengers was a person of color. There was no sound in the room, just the faint hum of an air vent and the soft click of cameras starting to record. She clicked forward. 6 had valid first-class tickets. 2 were medical professionals. 1 was a military veteran. 4 were children. This is not a coincidence. It's not a string of unrelated incidents. It's a reflection of bias, whether unconscious or not, that's been left unchecked. Eloria stepped away from the screen. So today we begin correcting that. She outlined the plan in 3 clear points. First, all frontline staff, ground and flight crew, will complete mandatory equity and empathy training within 60 days. This isn't optional, it's essential. Second, we're establishing an anonymous reporting system so employees at any level can safely report discriminatory behavior. And third, we will publish quarterly summaries of customer treatment reports because transparency is how we stay honest. A few hands shot up. One reporter stood, not waiting for a cue. Dr. Thorne, some investors are saying this damages Solera's image. Are you worried this will scare away customers? Eloria didn't flinch. We don't lose trust by admitting failure. We lose trust by covering it up. Another voice jumped in. Are you planning to name specific employees involved in these incidents? I'm not here to shame individuals, she said. I'm here to fix the conditions that allowed those decisions to go unquestioned. Back in her apartment, Gwen watched the press conference from her living room couch, legs curled under her, mug of coffee cold in her hands. Her eyes didn't leave the screen. When Eloria said, "I don't want anyone punished, but I do believe we must all be accountable," something in Gwen's chest tightened. She looked around her quiet apartment. The silence for once wasn't peaceful. It was reflective. She thought about the boy, about the ticket she hadn't read closely enough, about how fast she'd made up her mind. She didn't feel like the victim of a system turning on her. She felt like someone being asked to take a long, hard look in the mirror. That evening, Malik and Eloria ate dinner at the kitchen island. The TV was off. No headlines, no numbers, no updates. Just pasta and garlic bread and the hum of the dishwasher in the background. Malik twirled his fork in silence, then set it down. "Mom?" She looked up. "If one day someone tells me I don't deserve to be where I am, what should I do?" Eloria didn't rush to answer. She reached for her water, took a sip, and met his eyes. "You don't have to yell," she said softly. "You don't have to prove anything to someone who's already made up their mind. But you do have to stand tall, so they know you see yourself clearly, even if they don't." Malik didn't nod or smile. He just listened. And somewhere inside, something small and steady locked into place. The carpet in the hallway of Solara Air's corporate offices muted the sound of Gwen's footsteps, but her chest thudded loud enough that she could feel it in her ears. She kept her head up, back straight, eyes focused ahead. Still, her palms were damp. She'd been called in to meet with the Internal Review Board. That was the official term. Everyone knew it meant this was the meeting where they'd decide if she kept her job. As she rounded the corner near the reception lounge, she slowed. There, sitting on a leather bench beside a junior employee, was Malik Thorne. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't buried in a screen or a book, just sitting quietly, feet barely touching the floor, looking around like he was paying attention to more than just the walls. He looked up and locked eyes with her. Something about the stillness of his gaze made her stop. Not because it was angry. It wasn't. It was calm, measured. He stood up without a word. The employee beside him started to rise, concerned. "It's all right," Malik said, voice low. "I just want to talk." Gwen found herself frozen between embarrassment and instinct. She took a small step forward, unsure what to say. "You don't have to. I mean, you really don't," Malik interrupted gently, looking her in the eye. "I just want to ask you something." She nodded. He tilted his head, not accusing, not cold, just honest. "If I wasn't the CEO's son, would anyone be talking to you about what happened?" The question landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Gwen blinked. Her throat tightened. For a split second, the old reflex kicked in. The one that wanted to defend, explain, rationalize. The one trained by years of policy handbooks and quiet side comments. But something stopped her. She swallowed. Her eyes shimmered. "I think," she said slowly, "if you were someone else's kid, you probably wouldn't be here right now. And I'd still be walking around like nothing happened." Malik didn't respond. He just held her gaze for a moment longer, then gave the faintest nod. "Thank you for telling the truth," he said. And then he turned and walked back to his seat. Gwen stood there for a few seconds longer before finally heading to the boardroom. Inside, a long table stretched out beneath fluorescent lighting. 3 people sat at the far end, HR, legal, and an operations lead. Papers in front of them. No smiles. She took her seat quietly. They asked her to walk through the incident. She did. Clearly. She didn't leave out the part about assuming Malik was in the wrong. She didn't hide the fact that she hadn't looked closely at his boarding pass. When they asked, "Do you believe your actions were justified?" She didn't try to spin. "No," she said. "I think I let old habits decide for me, and that's something I need to work on." One of the reviewers raised an eyebrow. "You feel this whole process is fair then?" Gwen let out a slow breath. "Fair isn't always comfortable, but yes, I think it's fair." Another voice. "Why didn't you say that in your initial report?" She turned slightly in her chair, eyes drifting toward the door. "Because sometimes," she said, "it takes looking someone in the eye, the person you hurt, to understand what part of you needs fixing." Later that afternoon, in a different room across the building, Eloria sat at her desk, reviewing updates from the day. Her assistant stepped in briefly with a folder. "Gwen Barrage's statement," she said quietly. "Full acknowledgement. Took responsibility. No excuses." Eloria looked up. And the board's recommendation? 2-week suspension, no termination, mandatory retraining. The assistant hesitated. Do you want to weigh in? Eloria shook her head. Number, let them handle it. But it was your son. I know, Eloria said. But if we want the system to change, I have to let the system do its job. That evening back home, Malik sat at his small desk, scribbling something in his journal. He didn't tell anyone about the moment in the hallway, didn't say much at dinner, but he had words to put down now. Today I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't run away. I spoke, and she listened. I think maybe that's how things start to change. Not by being louder than everyone else, just by being honest, and by showing people that I'm not a problem. I'm a person just like them. The next morning, Malik boarded a new flight. Different route, same airline. This time, he walked up to the first-class cabin with steady feet and clear eyes. There were still looks. Of course there were. But they felt different. Curious, maybe. Not hostile. A flight attendant approached, smiling softly. Good morning, Malik. Have a great flight. And thank you. Malik didn't say much, just nodded once, settled into his seat and looked out the window. As the plane began to taxi, the world outside started to move. And this time, it moved with him in it, just as it should have all along. The training room at Solera Air headquarters smelled faintly of fresh paint and new carpet. Rows of folding tables lined with crisp notepads and water bottles stretched across the room. A laminated sign near the door read, Bias Recognition and Inclusive Service Workshop. Gwen sat near the back, her pen already clicking against the edge of her notebook. She wasn't in uniform, just a simple sweater, jeans, and a quiet presence. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She didn't talk to anyone. She didn't need to. The instructor, a woman with salt and pepper curls and a calm, deliberate voice, asked the room, Who here has ever believed they were above having bias? Silence stretched. Gwen looked up. Her hand didn't move. But her face changed, just a little, like someone had turned on a light inside her that she hadn't known was out. She took notes, real ones, not to prove anything to HR or a review board, but because something inside her wanted to do better, to be better. Not just for a job, for herself. Across town, Malik stood at the front of his fifth-grade classroom, holding a small note card with both hands. His classmates were a mix of fidgeting knees and quiet attention. A whiteboard behind him read, Inspiration Presentations. When it was his turn, he cleared his throat and began. I picked someone who helped me in a really quiet way, he said, not with words, just with how she looked at me. Some kids glanced at each other. Malik continued. She was a flight attendant. She didn't say anything big, but when something bad happened to me, she looked at me like she knew it wasn't fair, that I didn't deserve it. He paused, searching for the right words. And I think when someone realizes they were wrong and they don't pretend it didn't happen, that takes courage. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then someone clapped, and then others followed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Malik sat back down with a small smile he didn't even try to hide. Back at Solara, Eloria walked into her office and saw a white envelope sitting on her desk. No label, just her name handwritten across the front. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single-page note, neat and careful. I don't ask for things to go back to how they were. I just hope for the chance to learn, for real this time, not to save my job, but to reclaim my dignity. Another line followed. I used to think I knew right from wrong. Now I understand that sometimes right isn't in the rules. It's in how we treat people who have less power than we do. The signature at the bottom was Gwen's. Eloria sat down, folding the paper once before placing it gently inside a drawer. She didn't need to respond. Some letters were meant to be read, carried, and remembered. Later that afternoon, she and Malik walked together through a quiet park near their home. The leaves were beginning to turn, that early hint of fall in the air. A low sun hung just above the tree line, casting long shadows across the grass. They sat on a wooden bench near the pond. Ducks paddled in lazy circles. The breeze stirred gently. Malik picked at a corner of the bench with his thumbnail. Then he looked up. Do you think it'll happen again? Eloria glanced at him. People judging me like that? He asked. She didn't answer right away. She looked out at the water, let the question settle in her chest before responding. Maybe, she said finally. Maybe not right away, but probably. Malik frowned slightly. Aloria placed her hand over his. But if you keep seeing yourself clearly, she said, they won't be able to shrink you down with their gaze. You won't forget who you are just because they can't see it. They sat in silence for a while after that. No rush, no more words needed, just a mother and son, and the feeling of something steady growing beneath the noise. If you were to listen in on that moment, if it were told on the radio or around a table, you might hear a voice say, we don't change the whole world in one act, but sometimes one act is enough to shift someone's world forever. Malik wasn't the first kid to be underestimated. He wouldn't be the last. But maybe, just maybe, if enough kids stood like he did, and enough people listened like Gwen finally did, then tomorrow might start to look a little different, a little kinder, a little braver, and a little more fair. So what does it really mean to belong? Malik didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back with anger. He simply stood tall, and that was enough to shift something in the hearts around him. Maybe the world won't change overnight, but if we choose to see each other fully, beyond fear, beyond assumptions, that's a powerful place to start. What about you? Have you ever been underestimated? Share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that just might change the way you see the world.